family called asking me to help pay for my brother's lawyer. I asked what happened. They said he was suing me. I waited for the punchline. There wasn't one. I hung up. 3 days later, my brother's lawyer called me directly. My name's Adam. I'm 34. And if you told me a year ago that my own brother would try to sue me while simultaneously asking me to pay for the lawyer doing the suing, I would have laughed in your face. I would have offered you a glass of water, asked if you were feeling okay, and then laughed again just to make sure you understood how absurd that sounded. But here we are. Life has a funny way of making you the punchline to jokes you didn't even know were being written. Let me back up and give you the full picture, because this one needs context. I grew up in a small town outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. My parents, Gail and Herschel, were the kind of people who believed that family was everything. And by everything, I mean they believed family was an excuse to never set boundaries, never say no, and never hold anyone accountable for anything as long as they shared your last name. My older brother, Sutton, is 2 years ahead of me. Growing up, Sutton was the golden child. He was the quarterback, the homecoming king, the guy who walked into a room and made every adult within a 50-foot radius start grinning like they'd won the lottery. I was the quiet one, the kid who liked reading, who built things in the garage, who kept his head down and got decent grades without anyone noticing or caring. Now, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I had some tragic childhood. I didn't. My parents loved me. They fed me, clothed me, showed up to enough of my stuff to not qualify as neglectful. But there was always this unspoken understanding in our house that Sutton was the main event and I was the opening act that nobody really came to see. When Sutton scored a touchdown, the whole family drove 3 hours to watch. When I won the regional science fair, my mom said, "That's nice, honey," and went back to ironing Sutton's jersey. It wasn't cruelty. It was just gravity. Sutton was the sun, and the rest of us orbited. After high school, Sutton got a football scholarship to a mid-tier state school. He blew out his knee sophomore year, dropped out, and came home. And here's where things started to get interesting, because instead of regrouping and figuring out a new plan, Sutton just kind of stopped. He moved back in with our parents. He picked up odd jobs here and there, landscaping, bartending, a brief stint selling insurance that lasted exactly 11 days. But nothing stuck, and nobody in my family seemed to think that was a problem. Sutton was figuring things out. Sutton was going through a tough time. Sutton was 23 and playing video games in his childhood bedroom while my parents paid his car insurance. But sure, he was figuring things out. Meanwhile, I went to community college, transferred to UT, and graduated with a degree in civil engineering. It wasn't glamorous, but I worked my tail off. I got a job at a firm in Nashville, started at the bottom, and spent the next 8 years climbing. By 30, I was a project manager overseeing commercial builds worth millions. I bought a house. I met my wife, Jolene, at a friend's barbecue. She's an ER nurse, sharp as a tack, funny as hell, and the kind of person who can read a room faster than most people can read a menu. We got married 2 years ago. Life was good, really good. But here's the thing about being the successful sibling in a family that worships the unsuccessful one. You become the bank. Not officially, of course. Nobody sits you down and says, "Hey, Adam, since you're the one who actually got his life together, we're going to need you to fund everyone else's poor decisions." It's more subtle than that. It starts with small asks. Mom needs help with a dental bill. Dad's truck needs a new transmission. Sutton needs first and last month's rent because he's finally moving out. And you say yes, because they're your family and you love them, and honestly, you can afford it. Over the course of about 4 years, I estimate I gave my family somewhere in the neighborhood of $45,000. I didn't keep a running tab at first, because who does that with family? Jolene did, though. God bless that woman. She kept a spreadsheet. Not because she's cold or calculating, but because she's an ER nurse and she documents everything. It's in her DNA. When she first showed me the number, I thought she'd made an error. She hadn't. The thing that really got under my skin wasn't the money itself. It was the attitude. Every time I helped, it was met with this weird energy, like I owed them something. Like my success was a family resource that I was being selfish for not sharing more freely. Sutton especially had this way of making me feel like the money I earned was somehow communal property. He'd say things like, "Must be nice," when I mentioned anything about my life. New car? Must be nice. Vacation with Jolene? Must be nice. Some of us can't afford to leave the state. Promotion? Must be nice to have a job that actually pays. I let it slide for years. Jolene kept telling me I was being a doormat, and I kept telling her it was just how families work. She'd raise an eyebrow and say, "That's not how my family works," and I'd change the subject because deep down I knew she was right. The breaking point started building about 18 months ago. Sutton had gotten into flipping cars, buying junkers, fixing them up, selling them for a profit. On paper, it wasn't a bad idea. Sutton's always been good with his hands. The problem was that Sutton's version of flipping cars involved buying cars he couldn't afford to fix, storing them on a property he didn't own, and then asking me for money when the whole thing inevitably fell apart. He burned through 3 separate ventures in about 10 months. After the third one collapsed, he called me and asked for $15,000 to invest in a new batch of cars. I said no. For the first time in my adult life, I told my brother no. And you would have thought I told him I was canceling Christmas. He went silent on the phone for about 10 seconds, which if you know Sutton is basically an eternity. And then he said, "So that's how it is? I'm not worth 15 grand to you." I tried to explain that it wasn't about his worth, it was about the pattern. That I'd already given him tens of thousands of dollars and none of it had turned into anything. That I loved him, but I couldn't keep lighting money on fire. He hung up on me. Didn't hear from him for 2 weeks. And then I got the phone call that kicked off the most bizarre chapter of my life. It was my mom. She was doing that thing she does where her voice gets all soft and careful, like she's delivering news about a terminal diagnosis. "Adam, honey, we need to talk about something. Sutton's in a bit of a situation and he needs some help with legal fees." I asked what happened. Was he in trouble? Did he get a DUI? Did he hit someone? My mom paused. And then she said, "He's suing you, sweetheart. He says you owe him money from a business deal. He's already got a lawyer. But the lawyer needs a retainer and Sutton can't afford it. So we were hoping you could help cover it." I sat there with my phone pressed to my ear, waiting for the punchline. I actually laughed. Not a real laugh. More like the sound your brain makes when it's trying to reboot after a catastrophic error. My brother was suing me, and my family wanted me to pay for it. I told my mom I had to go, and I hung up. 3 days later, my brother's lawyer called me directly, and that's when I realized this wasn't just Sutton being dramatic. This was real. The man on the other end of the line was very real, very professional, and very serious. And the number he mentioned made my stomach drop straight through the floor. The lawyer's name was Grady Tate. I remember that because it sounded like a character from a legal thriller, which felt appropriate given that my life had apparently become one. He introduced himself, said he was representing my brother Sutton in a civil matter, and then hit me with the number, $200,000. My brother was suing me for $200,000. I actually pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at it, like the device itself had betrayed me. Then I put it back and said, "I'm sorry, can you repeat that?" He repeated it. $200,000 in damages for what he described as a verbal partnership agreement related to a car flipping business that Sutton claimed I had financially backed and then abandoned, causing him significant financial losses and emotional distress. Emotional distress. My brother, who had the emotional range of a ceiling fan, was claiming emotional distress. I told Grady I had no idea what he was talking about, that there was no partnership, no agreement, and that every dollar I'd ever given Sutton was a gift, not an investment. Grady said, very politely, that his client saw it differently and that I'd be receiving formal documentation within the week. Then he wished me a good evening and hung up. I sat in my home office for a long time after that call. Jolene found me there about an hour later, just staring at my desk like it had personally offended me. She asked what was wrong, and when I told her, she didn't yell. She didn't gasp. She just closed her eyes, took a breath, and said, "I'm going to need you to tell me that again, but slower, because I want to make sure I'm furious about the right thing." I told her again. She was furious about the right thing. Here's what Sutton's lawsuit claimed. He alleged that 2 years prior, when I'd given him $12,000 for his second car flipping attempt, I had verbally agreed to be his business partner. That the money wasn't a gift, but a capital investment. That I had promised to continue funding the operation and that when I pulled out, I caused the business to fail, resulting in lost income, debt, and, again, emotional distress. He wanted $200,000 to cover what the business would have earned plus damages. Now, anyone with a functioning brainstem could see this was nonsense. There was no partnership. There was no agreement. I'd given my brother money the same way you'd give a friend $20 when they forget their wallet at lunch, except I'd done it about 200 times and the lunch cost $45,000. But Sutton had apparently found a lawyer willing to take the case. And in our legal system, that's all you need to make someone's life very uncomfortable. I called my parents the next day, hoping that maybe, just maybe, they'd have come to their senses. My dad answered. I asked if he knew what Sutton was doing. He said he did. I asked if he thought it was reasonable. There was a long pause, and then my dad said, "Well, Adam, your brother feels like you made him a promise and you broke it. He's hurting." "He's hurting?" I said. "He's suing me for $200,000, Dad. I'm the one who should be hurting." My dad sighed like I was the unreasonable one. "Son, you know how Sutton is. He gets an idea in his head and he runs with it. But this could all go away if you just sit down with him and work something out. Maybe give him what he needs to get back on his feet." "What he needs to get back on his feet is a reality check, not my checkbook," I said. My dad went quiet. Then he said something that I will never forget as long as I live. He said, "Adam, you've always had it easier than your brother. You went to college, you got the good job, you married a wonderful girl. Sutton didn't get those breaks. The least you could do is help him when he's down." The least I could do. Like I'd been sitting on a throne eating grapes while my brother suffered. Like my engineering degree fell out of the sky and landed in my lap. Like Jolene showed up at my door with a bow on her head. Everything I had, I'd built. Brick by brick, late night by late night, missed weekend by missed weekend. But in my family's eyes, I'd just gotten lucky, and Sutton had gotten unlucky, and the universe owed him a correction that apparently had to come out of my bank account. I hung up on my dad. Second time in a week, I'd hung up on a family member. New personal record. The next few weeks were a blur of legal paperwork and anxiety. I hired my own attorney, a woman named Cordelia Voss, who came recommended by a colleague. Cordelia was exactly what I needed. She was calm, direct, and had this way of explaining things that made you feel like the ground was solid even when everything else was shaking. She reviewed Sutton's claim and told me, in her professional opinion, that it was legally creative, which I later learned was attorney speak for "this is garbage, but we still have to deal with it." The problem, Cordelia explained, was that even a frivolous lawsuit costs money to defend. Even if Sutton's case got thrown out, which she believed it eventually would, I'd still be spending thousands on legal fees, discovery, depositions, and court appearances. Sutton's lawyer might be hoping I'd just settle to make it go away. It's a common tactic. File something outrageous, bet that the defendant would rather write a check than deal with the headache. Meanwhile, my family went into full pressure mode. My mom called 3 times in 1 week. "Can't you just give him something?" she kept saying. My Aunt Laureen called to tell me I was tearing the family apart. My cousin Bodie sent me a Facebook message saying I should be ashamed. Not one of them acknowledged that Sutton was the one who filed the lawsuit. Every finger pointed at me. Jolene was my rock through all of it. She'd come home from 12-hour shifts at the hospital, find me pacing in the kitchen, and she'd sit me down and talk me through it. She never once said, "I told you so," even though she had every right to. She just held my hand and said, "We're going to handle this together." But here's the part that really broke me. About a month into the legal mess, I found out how Sutton was affording Grady Tate. My mom had taken out a home equity line of credit on my parents' house. My parents, who were both in their mid-60s and living on a fixed income, had leveraged their home to fund my brother's lawsuit against me. When I found out, I drove to their house. I sat at their kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten cereal as a kid and done homework and blown out birthday candles, and I looked at my mother and I said, "Mom, do you understand what you've done? If this case goes south, and it will, you could lose this house." My mom started crying. But she didn't cry because she realized she'd made a terrible mistake. She cried because I was being mean to Sutton. She said, through tears, that Sutton deserved a chance to be heard, that he'd been struggling for so long and nobody was helping him, that I had more than enough to share. I looked at my dad. He was staring at the table. He didn't say a word. I stood up, pushed my chair in, and walked out of that house. I sat in my truck in their driveway for a long time with the engine off and the windows up, trying to figure out how I'd become the villain in a story where I was the only one who'd ever done anything for anyone. The return on all of that generosity was a lawsuit and a family that thought I was selfish for not wanting to fund my own destruction. I turned the key, backed out of the driveway, and drove home. I didn't cry. I wanted to, but the tears wouldn't come. It was like my body had decided that these people didn't deserve that from me anymore. Jolene was waiting on the porch when I pulled in. She took one look at my face and said, "That bad?" I nodded. She put her arm around me and walked me inside. That night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. I was done being the family ATM. I was done being the bigger person. I was done absorbing everyone else's problems while they treated me like I was the problem. If my brother wanted a fight, I was going to give him one, but not the kind he expected. The weeks after I walked out of my parents' house were some of the loneliest of my life. I'd effectively cut off contact with my entire family. No calls, no texts, no Sunday dinners. My mom tried reaching out a few times, but every message was some variation of "this would all be over if you just helped Sutton," so I stopped reading them. My dad sent one text that said, "Call your mother," and that was it. "No, how are you doing, son?" "No, I'm sorry this is happening." Just a directive to go comfort the people who were actively trying to take $200,000 from me. Father of the Year material right there. The isolation hit harder than I expected. I'd spent my whole life being the reliable one, the one who showed up, the one who fixed things. Suddenly, I wasn't showing up for anyone except Jolene, and while she was more than enough, there was this hollow feeling in my chest that wouldn't go away. Like a room in my house had been emptied out overnight, and I kept walking past the open door and being surprised by the emptiness. Work became my lifeline. I threw myself into a massive commercial project, a mixed-use development downtown that was the biggest thing our firm had ever taken on. My boss, a no-nonsense guy named Harlan, noticed the extra hours I was putting in. He pulled me aside one afternoon and said, "You're either running from something or running towards something. Either way, the work's been outstanding, so keep doing whatever you're doing." Harlan wasn't the type to pry, but he was the type to recognize effort, and that small acknowledgement meant more to me than he probably knew. Jolene, meanwhile, was quietly building our defense from home. Remember that spreadsheet she'd been keeping? She pulled it out, organized every single transaction I'd ever made to my family, and started gathering documentation. Bank statements, Venmo records, text messages where Sutton thanked me for helping out and never once mentioned a partnership, voicemails from my mom asking for a little loan that was never paid back. Jolene is not the kind of woman who gets angry and screams. She's the kind who gets angry and builds a filing system. It's honestly terrifying and beautiful in equal measure. Cordelia, my attorney, reviewed everything Jolene had compiled, and her eyes went wide. "Your wife is a paralegal stream," she said. "This is more documentation than most people bring me in corporate disputes, let alone family cases." She explained that the text messages were particularly valuable because they established a clear pattern. Gift after gift after gift, always framed as help, never as investment. There wasn't a single text, email, or document anywhere that suggested a business partnership. Not one. Cordelia also did some digging on Sutton's lawyer, Grady Tate. Turns out Grady was operating a small practice that primarily handled personal injury cases, the kind you see on bus bench advertisements. He'd apparently taken Sutton's case on a modified contingency basis, meaning he'd get paid when and if they won or settled. This was important because it meant Grady had a financial incentive to push for a quick settlement rather than go to trial. Cordelia's strategy was simple. Don't settle. Don't blink. Make them take it all the way to court, where their case would fall apart like wet cardboard. While the legal gears turned slowly, I focused on getting my head right. Jolene suggested I talk to someone, and normally I would have brushed that off because I'm a 34-year-old man from Tennessee, and we're genetically programmed to believe therapy is just complaining with a copay. But she gave me that look, the one that means she's not really suggesting. She's informing me of what's about to happen, and I made an appointment. My therapist's name was Wren. She was about 60, had reading glasses she never actually put on her face, and she had this way of asking a question that made you realize you'd been lying to yourself for years. In our third session, she asked me a question that kind of rewired my brain. She said, "Adam, when was the last time someone in your family asked how you were doing without following it up with a request for something?" I sat there trying to think of an answer. I ran through years of phone calls, visits, holidays, and I couldn't come up with one. Not a single time. Every conversation, every interaction, every moment of connection had been transactional. They called when they needed something. They were warm when they wanted something. And the rest of the time, I was background noise. Realizing that didn't make me sad. It made me furious. But it was a clean kind of fury, the kind that doesn't make you want to break things. It makes you want to build better things. And that's exactly what I did. I started investing in myself in ways I'd been putting off for years. I took a leadership development course through work. I got certified in a specialized project management methodology that put me in a different tier professionally. Harlan noticed and started including me in client pitches, something usually reserved for senior partners. I was good at it too. I could read a room, explain complex engineering concepts in plain English, and make clients feel confident that their $30 million building was in good hands. By the 6th month of my family estrangement, I'd been promoted to associate partner. My salary went up by 40%. Jolene and I started talking about buying a bigger house, maybe starting a family. Jolene and I also started building the kind of social life I'd never really had. When you spend your 20s and early 30s being the designated helper for your biological family, you don't leave a lot of room for friendships. But now, with that weight lifted, we had time. We started having people over for dinner. My colleague Emmett and his wife Rosalind became close friends. Our neighbor Lila, a retired schoolteacher with the sharpest wit I've ever encountered, became like an unofficial aunt to both of us. I joined a weekend softball league with guys from the firm. For the first time in my life, I had a community that didn't revolve around obligation and guilt. The irony of it all wasn't lost on me. My family had treated me like I was nothing without them, like cutting me off from the family would devastate me. Instead, losing them had been like taking off a weighted vest I didn't know I was wearing. I could breathe. I could stand up straight. I could exist without the constant hum of someone else's needs drowning out my own. About 8 months in, I got a call from my cousin Waverly. Now, Waverly was the one family member who'd never asked me for anything. She was younger, lived out in Colorado, and had always been kind of the black sheep of the extended family, which in retrospect probably meant she was the most well-adjusted one. She called to tell me that things at home were getting rough. Sutton's lawsuit was stalling. Grady Tate had apparently realized that the case was weaker than Sutton had represented and was getting cold feet. Meanwhile, my parents' financial situation was deteriorating. The home equity line they'd taken out was accumulating interest, and my mom had apparently started selling furniture to make the payments. Waverly wasn't calling to guilt me. She made that very clear. She said, "I'm not telling you this because I think you should do anything about it. I'm telling you because you deserve to know what's happening, and because nobody else in this family is being honest with you." I thanked her for that. I meant it. Honesty had become a rare currency in my family, and Waverly had just made a generous deposit. Cordelia called me a few days later with an update. Discovery was underway, and Sutton's side had produced almost nothing. No written agreement, no emails discussing partnership terms, no contracts, nothing. Just Sutton's word against mine. Meanwhile, Cordelia had submitted Jolene's documentation, all 47 pages of it, plus my bank records, plus a timeline showing that every single payment was a one-way gift with no expectation of return. "We're in very good shape," Cordelia said. "But I want to talk to you about something. We have enough here to not just win this case, but to file a countersuit. Your brother filed a frivolous lawsuit that has cost you significant legal fees and emotional distress. We could go after him for those costs, and then some." I told her I'd think about it. I went home and talked to Jolene. She was sitting on the couch with a glass of wine and our dog, a lazy beagle named Hank, draped across her lap. I told her what Cordelia had said. Jolene looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "You know what I think? I'm afraid to ask." She smiled. "I think your brother started a fire in your front yard and then complained that the smoke was bothering him. And I think it's time you let him feel the heat." That was all I needed to hear. I told Cordelia to move forward with the countersuit. She didn't hesitate. Within a week, she had it drafted, reviewed, and ready to file. The countersuit alleged abuse of process and sought reimbursement for all legal fees I'd incurred defending against Sutton's claim, plus damages for the time, stress, and professional disruption the frivolous lawsuit had caused. The total we were seeking was $85,000. Not $200,000 like Sutton's fantasy number, but a real, documented, defensible amount based on actual costs and actual harm. Cordelia also added something I hadn't considered. She included a detailed accounting of every dollar I'd ever given my family, all $45,000 and change, and framed it as relevant context to demonstrate a long-standing pattern of financial support that Sutton had exploited and then weaponized. She wasn't asking for that money back, not technically, But she was making sure the court understood exactly who had been generous and who had been ungrateful. It was surgical, and it was devastating. The day the countersuit was filed, I got a call from my mom before the sun went down. She was hysterical. "Adam, what are you doing? You're going to destroy your brother. You're going to destroy this family." I kept my voice calm. I'd practiced this with Ren, my therapist, and I was ready. "Mom, Sutton sued me. He filed a lawsuit claiming I owed him $200,000. I didn't start this, but I'm going to finish it. But he's your brother," she said, like that was a legal defense. "And I'm your son," I said. "But that didn't stop you from taking out a loan against your house to help him come after me. So I think we're past the point where family titles mean much, don't you?" She didn't have an answer for that. She just cried and hung up. I felt something twist in my gut, but I didn't call her back. There's a difference between guilt and grief, and what I was feeling was grief. Grief for the family I wished I'd had. Grief for the version of my mom who would have told Sutton he was wrong and to knock it off. That version didn't exist, and I needed to stop mourning her. Over the next few weeks, things started moving fast. Cordelia had requested a deposition of Sutton, and the date was set. She spent 2 evenings prepping me on what to expect, but she also told me something interesting. She'd spoken with Grady Tate informally, lawyer to lawyer, and she said he sounded tired. Not tired like he'd been working hard, but tired like a man who'd realized he was pushing a boulder uphill and the boulder was made of nothing. "I think Grady knows this case is a loser," Cordelia told me. "He took it thinking you'd settle quick. We didn't settle. Now he's months in. He's done a bunch of work on contingency, and the discovery has produced nothing that helps his client. He's going to start looking for an exit." That was good news, but I wasn't counting on Grady folding. Sutton had a way of convincing people to keep going long past the point of reason. He'd done it with our parents. He'd done it with every failed business. He'd convince Grady to push forward if he could. What Sutton didn't know was that I had an ace in my pocket. Emmett, my colleague and close friend, had introduced me to his brother-in-law, a forensic accountant named Sullivan Price. Sullivan was the kind of guy who found joy in spreadsheets the way some people find joy in sunsets. He was meticulous, detail-obsessed, and slightly terrifying in the best possible way. I hired Sullivan to do a full financial analysis of Sutton's car flipping businesses. All 3 of them. Sullivan came back 2 weeks later with a report that was 40 pages long and utterly damning. Here's what he found. In the first car flipping venture, Sutton had purchased 3 vehicles using the money I'd given him. He sold one at a loss, scrapped one, and the third was still sitting in a storage lot accumulating fees. Total loss to me, about $8,000. In the second venture, the one at the center of the lawsuit, Sutton had purchased 5 vehicles. He'd fixed and sold 2 at a modest profit, about $3,000 total. But he'd spent most of the $12,000 I gave him not on cars, but on personal expenses. New television, a vacation to Myrtle Beach with his then-girlfriend Teeter, and, I'm not making this up, a home brewing kit that he used exactly once. The other 3 cars sat untouched and were eventually repossessed by the lot owner for unpaid storage. The third venture, the one I'd refused to fund, never got off the ground. Sutton had no inventory, no capital, and no business plan. Sullivan concluded that even if I had given Sutton the $15,000 he'd asked for, there was no viable business model that would have generated the $200,000 in revenue Sutton was claiming as damages. In Sullivan's words, the projected income figures in the plaintiff's claim bear no relationship to any reasonable financial reality. I read that line out loud to Jolene. She laughed so hard she woke up Hank. Cordelia added Sullivan's report to our evidence package. The case was airtight. Sutton had no partnership agreement, no documentation, no credible financial projections, and a clear record of misusing the funds I'd given him. On top of that, my countersuit was backed by every receipt, every bank statement, and every text message that proved my generosity and his ingratitude. But here's where things took one more turn. About a week before Sutton's deposition, I got a call from Waverly in Colorado. She sounded nervous. She said Sutton had called her, drunk, ranting about how I was ruining his life. But in the middle of his rant, he'd let something slip. He told Waverly that the whole lawsuit had been his girlfriend's idea. Not Teeter, the Myrtle Beach girlfriend. A new one, a woman named Darla, who Sutton had been seeing for about 6 months. According to Waverly, Darla had told Sutton that he was entitled to half of everything I had because I'd built my career on the back of family support. that the money I'd given him proved we were partners and that I owed him more. Waverly said, "Adam, I think this Darla woman has been in his ear the whole time. Sutton's not smart enough to come up with a lawsuit on his own. He can barely operate a microwave." I thanked Waverly and immediately called Cordelia. She was very interested. She did some research and found that Darla had a history. She'd been involved in 2 prior civil suits, both against former partners, both alleging informal business arrangements that were never documented. One was dismissed. The other settled for a small amount. It was a pattern. Darla found men who had access to money, either their own or their families, and she weaponized the legal system to extract it. Cordelia was practically vibrating with energy. "This changes the narrative entirely," she said. "Your brother isn't just an ungrateful sibling. He's a patsy being manipulated by someone who does this professionally. And I can prove it." She drafted an amended filing that included Darla's litigation history and Sutton's admission to Waverly that the lawsuit was her idea. Waverly agreed to provide a sworn statement. My cousin, the one family member who'd stayed honest, was about to help bring the whole thing crashing down. The deposition was scheduled for a Tuesday. Cordelia told me to wear a suit, be calm, say as little as possible, and let her do the talking. "You're the stable, successful brother who gave everything and got sued for it," she said. "That's the story, and it's true, which is even better." The night before the deposition, Jolene and I sat on our back porch. Hank was asleep at our feet. The air was warm and the neighborhood was quiet. Jolene leaned over and said, "You know, a year ago you were sitting at your parents' kitchen table begging them to see reason. Tomorrow you're going to walk into a room and your brother's going to have to look you in the eye and explain why he thought any of this was a good idea." I nodded. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it for a second. "Ready," I said. "I feel ready." And I meant it. The deposition was held at Cordelia's firm, in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a long oak table. I arrived early, wearing a navy suit Jolene had picked out, feeling ready. Sutton showed up 15 minutes late. He looked rough, not in a dramatic way, but in the way that someone looks when they've been making bad decisions for a long time and the bill is starting to come due. He'd lost weight. His clothes didn't fit right. He walked in with Grady Tate, who looked like a man who deeply regretted getting out of bed that morning, and Darla, who I was seeing in person for the first time. She was lean, polished, and had the kind of sharp eyes that catalog everything in a room within the first 3 seconds. She was not there as a legal party. She was there as moral support, supposedly. Cordelia noticed her immediately and said nothing, but I could tell she'd filed it away. The deposition started with Grady asking me questions. He tried to establish that I had been involved in Sutton's business decisions, that I'd attended meetings about car purchases, that I'd given input on which vehicles to buy. I answered each question honestly. No, I had never attended a meeting. No, I had never given input on inventory. No, I had never seen a business plan, because there wasn't one. Yes, I had given Sutton money. No, it was not an investment. It was a gift. Every time. Grady kept pushing, trying to find an angle. "Isn't it true that you told your brother," and I quote, "I believe in what you're doing"? I probably did say something like that, I said. The same way you tell a friend their new haircut looks good even if it doesn't. It's called being supportive. It's not a binding contract. I saw Cordelia suppress a smile. Then it was Cordelia's turn. And this is where things went from uncomfortable to devastating. She started with the financial records. She walked Sutton through every dollar I'd given him, $45,000 and change over 4 years, and asked him to identify which payments were investments and which were gifts. Sutton stumbled. He said they were a mix. She asked him to be specific. He couldn't. She showed him his own text messages, the ones where he'd written things like, "Thanks for helping me out, bro," and "I really appreciate the loan. I'll pay you back when I can." She asked if those sounded like the words of a business partner or a family member receiving help. "I don't know. It's just how I talk," Sutton said. "Right," Cordelia said. "You talk like someone who received gifts." Because that's what they were. She moved on to Sullivan's forensic report. She walked Sutton through the finances of each car flipping venture and watched him try to explain how a business that lost money on 2 out of 3 attempts was somehow going to generate $200,000 in profit. Sutton couldn't explain it. He kept looking at Darla, who was sitting in the back of the room with her arms crossed and her jaw tight. Then Cordelia played her final card. She brought up Darla's litigation history. She didn't accuse anyone of anything directly. She simply presented the facts. 2 prior lawsuits with nearly identical structures, informal business claims, no documentation, demands for large settlements. She asked Sutton if he was aware of this. Sutton blinked. "I don't know what you're talking about," Cordelia said. "I'm asking if you knew that the woman who suggested you file this lawsuit has done the exact same thing twice before with 2 different men." The room went very quiet. Grady shifted in his chair. Darla stood up and said, "This is irrelevant. I'm not a party to this case." Cordelia didn't even look at her. "You're right, you're not a party to this case. But your influence on my client's brother is documented, and it's part of the pattern we intend to present to the court." Darla walked out. Sutton watched her go, and for the first time since this whole mess started, he looked scared. Not angry, not defiant. Scared. Like a kid who just realized the person he'd been following didn't actually know the way home. The deposition ended about an hour later. Grady asked for a recess and then asked to speak with Cordelia privately. I waited in the lobby with Jolene, who had taken the day off to be there. She held my hand and didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Cordelia came out 20 minutes later. She was doing that thing she does where she's clearly excited but trying to maintain professional composure. She sat down across from us and said, "Grady wants to settle." I raised an eyebrow. Their side wants to settle? More accurately, Grady wants to withdraw. He's told Sutton he doesn't believe the case is winnable and he's recommended dropping the suit entirely. Sutton is apparently resisting, but Grady is done. He's withdrawing as counsel. "What about our countersuit?" I asked. "That's the interesting part," Cordelia said. "Grady knows that if we proceed with the countersuit, Sutton's going to owe you money he doesn't have. He suggested a resolution. Sutton drops his suit, we drop ours, and it's over. Clean break." I sat with that for a minute. Jolene squeezed my hand. I looked at Cordelia and said, "No." Both women looked at me. "I've spent over $30,000 defending myself against a lawsuit that should never have been filed," I said. "I've spent $45,000 over the past 4 years supporting a family that repaid me by trying to bankroll my brother's legal attack on me. I'm not walking away clean. I want my legal fees recovered. Every cent." Cordelia nodded. "I can make that happen." And she did. The final resolution came 3 weeks later. Sutton dropped his lawsuit. In exchange for us dropping the countersuit, Sutton agreed to a structured repayment of my legal fees, roughly $32,000, paid over 4 years. It was put in writing, signed by both parties, and filed with the court. If he missed a payment, I could reinstate the countersuit with interest. Cordelia made sure of that. But the money wasn't the real payoff. The real payoff was what happened after. Darla disappeared from Sutton's life within days of the deposition, presumably to find her next target. Without her in his ear, Sutton went through a period of what my therapist Ren would call painful clarity. It took him a while, but about 3 months after the settlement, I got a letter in the mail. Not a text, not a phone call. A handwritten letter. It was from Sutton, 2 pages long, written in that messy handwriting I remembered from when we were kids. He didn't make excuses. He said he was ashamed. He said he'd spent so long being jealous of me that he'd convinced himself I owed him something, and that when someone came along and validated that belief, he'd grabbed onto it because it was easier than admitting his problems were his own. He said he didn't expect forgiveness. He just wanted me to know he was sorry. I read that letter 3 times. Then I folded it up and put it in my desk drawer. I haven't forgiven Sutton. Not fully. Forgiveness isn't a light switch, and some things take time. But I did respond. I sent him a short note that said I'd read his letter and I appreciated his honesty, and that the door wasn't closed, but it was going to stay mostly shut for a while. He respected that. My parents are a different story. My mom eventually called to apologize, sort of. One of those apologies that's really just a renegotiation. "I'm sorry things got so out of hand, but you know we were just trying to help Sutton." I told her I loved her, but I wasn't ready to pretend everything was fine. We talk occasionally now. Short calls, surface-level stuff. My dad still hasn't apologized. I don't think he ever will. As for me, I'm thriving. Jolene and I bought a bigger house last spring, a Craftsman with a wraparound porch that she fell in love with the second she saw it. I made senior partner at the firm. Hank is still the laziest beagle in North America. Waverly came to visit us last month and spent the whole weekend laughing with Jolene about things I was apparently not supposed to hear. I've got Emmett and Rosalind, Lila next door, my softball guys on the weekends. I've got a life that I built, not because someone gave it to me, not because I got lucky, but because I worked for it, and I protected it when it was threatened. And Sutton? He's making his payments. On time, every month. He got a steady job at a body shop, and from what Waverly tells me, he's actually pretty good at it when he's not trying to be an entrepreneur. Maybe one day we'll sit on my porch and laugh about all of this. Maybe we won't. But either way, I know this much. I am nobody's ATM. I am nobody's backup plan. And if anyone ever tries to sue me again, I've got a wife with a spreadsheet, a lawyer with a backbone, and a forensic accountant who finds joy in destroying bad math. I think I'll be just fine.